Welcome to week 3 of the Apothecary Bag Sew Along by Sincerely Jen Patterns. Today we are going to be working on finishing up our exterior while also getting the interior ready. First thing we're going to do is we're going to attach our strap connectors. Last week I showed you how to fold these and put them together. This week we are going to attach them to our bag. We have 4 of these in total. 2 are going to go on the front and 2 are going to go on the back. Now, just to save time, I'm only going to show you how to do 1 of these, and then I've already done the other 3 just so you don't have to sit and watch all of those. So since we have this, what we're going to do is we're going to take it and place it upside down on our bag front and on the bag back. The way Jenny has us do this is she tells us to just attach it right here beside the side seam. No measuring is needed. You just take it and place it upside down, flush with the top of your bag, right against that seam. Really good. So that's easy to do it. So I'm just going to baste this in place on my bag front. Let me clip that long thread. You will repeat that for all 4 of your connectors. Now what you're going to do is you're going to attach the top panels. These are your top panels. You should have 4 of these. 2 will have Decaville light attached to them. The 2 with Decaville light are going to go on your exterior front and your exterior back. These pattern pieces are not exactly a rectangle. So what you need to do is make sure you understand the orientation of them. So what I do is with my pattern piece, I go ahead and use it to mark my top panel, or the top of the panel, sorry. And so what you can also do too is you're going to understand that the wider part, this is the wider part, that's the bottom of your top panel, is going to end up going like this when it's done. So if you orientate it this way and you look at it, then you'll just flip it down so that you can sew it on. And you can even see right here, whenever I put it on here, it matches perfectly right here where I'm going to sew it on, but you can see there's a little bit of gap here. So this is the smaller edge, this is my larger edge. Now I went ahead and drew on my seam allowance, which is 1/2 inch. You don't have to do that. I just did it 1 to help show you clearly that you're sewing this on at 1/2 inch, and also so I won't forget while I was making this video. Okay, so I'm going to sew this on the top of the front of my bag exterior. When I get close to the strap connectors, I'm going to make sure that the metal hardware is down, and I'm going to go back and forth just a little bit more to secure these down in place. Now that I have this attached, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this entire piece up. I want my seam allowance to go down, so my seam allowance will be touching the bottom part of the bag, and this will allow my strap connectors to flip up. So flipping it down, you can see it's going down there. So I'm going to do that and we'll lay it down so I can kind of press it out. If you want to go to the iron, you can do that. I am not going to. I'm just going to flatten it out with my fingers. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to top stitch, and I'm going to get this exterior and the seam allowance caught in that top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this fold here. As I'm top stitching, I'm pulling to make sure everything is nice and tight. The front of my bag is now complete. I went ahead and did the back of my bag off camera to just save some time, but you can see I did it the same way. Attach my strap connectors right against that side panel, and then I did sew my seam allowance down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach my back to my front and sew the sides together. What I like to do whenever I'm doing this is whatever part has the most hardware, I'm going to put it on the bottom. So since my front has some more zipper pulls and the zippers, I'm going to put it on the bottom. This will just help it go on my bed easier so it's not bumping against this hardware. So what I do first is I attach these and I match up my seams. This seam's very important to me. So I'm going to go ahead and attach and clip there. And I'm going to do that on the other side. Because I want these seams to match up pretty, I'm just going to do a quick baste over these two seams. So I'm just going to do 1/8 of an inch right here. The reason why I'm going to baste these, just this area right here, is so whenever I'm sewing down the entire length of the bag, they don't shift. Quick baste there on that little seam. You don't have to do this. This is just something I do whenever I'm really wanting a bag to look its best. So that's just a basting stitch. No big deal there. Now, my true stitch is going to be at 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. And you can see, I still am going to have this one in the front on the bottom, my back on the top, so it flows easier through my machine. I also want to show you that sometimes mine doesn't always line up perfectly. If it doesn't line up perfectly, you still sew your 1/2 of an inch. You don't take that into consideration, because if you do, you're going to be off. So what I would do is, where this is a little bit short on that, this won't be a full 1/2 of an inch here. It'll be a little bit less, so that I still get a perfectly straight seam all the way down. I am going to start. I'm going to make sure everything looks great, and it does. And I'm just going to lock in these stitches and do my 1/2 of an inch seam allowance on both sides. Now when I said that, I didn't have to worry about my seams matching up because I already basted them in place. But now Jenny tells us to cut our seams down to about 1/8 of an inch to get rid of that bulk. Do that on both sides. So now we're going to start working on the crossbody strap connectors. So this piece that we've cut for that is a 2x3. Yours will have interfacing on it. I'm just showing you on a separate piece to how to do it. First thing you'll do is you'll draw a line down the middle lengthwise. Draw this halfway. If you need to find it, you can measure, or you can just fold your piece in half and find it that way. So draw the line halfway down the middle. Then you'll fold each long edge to that middle line you drew. Okay, the next thing I do is I just make a mark 1 inch down from the top, and then I fold that raw edge right there. Now on the strap connectors I'm actually going to put a piece of double-sided tape right along the top here. And so when I fold it down, it'll just kind of secure it in place there. I do recommend that. I don't suggest double-sided tape a lot of times, but this is one that I feel like it does kind of help secure things because we have a lot of moving parts with this. So that is the first thing you'll do. Fold that down there like that. Then you'll take this raw edge and you're going to make it match. It's going to come all the way down to here. So now your crossbody strap connector is actually going to measure about, I think it's 1 inch by 1.5 inches. And what we're going to do now is we're going to slide our D-ring right here to the top. Okay, so let me pull mine out because this was just one I was showing you with. So I have my D-ring right here, and you can see that I've already put my double-sided tape on there to kind of keep that a little bit snug in there. So what I'm going to show you now is where we're going to attach this. So I took my completed exterior and turned it right side out. I don't recommend us sewing it this way, but I wanted to show you the placement, and I feel like I could do it best here. So where your two seams match, you're going to put that top right there. I don't know how well you can see it where it's black on black, but you're going to put it right there. So it's going to be centered along that with the top of your edge right against the top of your seams. Now, we're going to sew this. We're going to flip this back actually inside out and sew it that way. That's the way I feel is the best way to do it. And I want to explain something. You have this here, which creates, your hardware creates some bulk here. So the way I'm going to sew mine is a little probably ridiculous to most, but I'm actually going to sew here, and then I'm going to break my stitches. Then I'm going to sew up this way, break my stitches, sew up this way, break my stitches, and then sew across the bottom here. Yes, I could just sew all the way around it, but the bulk kind of gives me a little bit of grief on my machine, and I don't really feel like using one of the hump jumpers or something like that. So this is the way I do it. Sew yours however you want, but for me, I get the best stitching when I do it that way. Sew across here, sew from the bottom up, sew from the bottom up, and then sew across here. But whatever method works for you, do it that way. Okay, and I'm just going to show one side of this just to save time again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip my bag inside out. You could add another piece of double-sided tape on this if you wanted to, but I didn't feel like I needed to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it right here, line it up, and take it over to my machine and start stitching here. If you do it my way, make sure you lock in your stitches every time. Now, we're just going to sew 1/8 of an inch on all 4 sides. If you're uncomfortable with this, you may want to use a thread that blends in a little bit better. Doesn't bother me, so I'm just using contrasting thread. I'm just going to clean up my stitches, my threads, and you can see I got that on there. Okay, I'm going to set this aside for a minute, and what we're going to start working on is the bottom. Now, if you remember, I did make mention that I was going to, and I didn't clip that, I was going to add a row of stitching to kind of help secure my Decaville Heavy on the base. I just didn't want this to be popping off while I was turning the bag. So you can see it at times, but it's really not that distracting to me, and it just makes me feel better and gives me a little bit more security there. I did decide to add purse feet. I went ahead and installed 3, but I was going to show you how I did the last one just in case you had any desire to add this to your own bag. First thing you'll see is that I did make a line down the center on both sides of this bottom panel. You will need to do this for help whenever you're actually attaching this exterior bottom to your exterior bag. So definitely make sure you have this already. It also helps when you're attaching your purse feet. What I do is after I have this is then I just add another set of halfway marks, and then you can see even here I have another set of halfway marks this way. You can do it however you want. You can measure in if you want, but this is just the way I do it, so however you want to do it. But the way you attach purse feet is dependent on what kind of purse feet you have. I have just the simple little prong purse feet. So what I do is I make my measurements as to where I want my purse feet to go. And then I use my seam ripper. And so I've already decided I want it to go. The last one's going to go right here. I'm going to poke through, and it's going. You have to put some pressure because you're going through that Decaville Heavy. I'm just going to make my slit. And then I am just going to pop that purse foot right through there, come to the back, and just open my prongs. There are different types of purse feet you can use, but this is the cheap ones that I use. Some people do put masking tape or some kind of tape or interfacing even over your prongs. They feel like that helps protect the lining so that it doesn't wear through. I've never had that problem, so I don't do that step, but if you want, you can put a piece of tape or a piece of interfacing over these to help protect. But that is how you do purse feet, the simple prong type. So now we're going to go ahead and start attaching this to our exterior. When we pull out our exterior, we have a couple of things that we already have marked. I've already got my center marks here from whenever I first did the interfacing week 1 video. We talked about making those there. Now, we also have our little side seams just from where we sewed the bag together. So I don't need to mark those. They're already marked. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 markings on the bottom of our bag. We're going to line those up and clip them first with the 4 markings on the bottom panel exterior. Once we get those 4 marks clipped, then we can go ahead and clip around the rest of them. When we sew this bag, we are actually going to be sewing right up against the Decaville Heavy. If you did the proper placement with getting everything even, it's going to be about a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. I checked mine just to see, and I wasn't perfect. Like this part, you can see I was just a little bit off here. That's not going to matter a bit. It's going to be perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do is I have an 1/8 inch foot on my sewing machine, and so I'm going to sew just right up against this Decaville Heavy. I am not going to sew on my Decaville Heavy. I'm just going to sew right up against it all around. So let's start clipping. Right sides together, lining up my first right sides together, lining up my second mark. I am going to line up my sides now where we've already trimmed these sides down. You don't have to worry so much about if you need to open your seam or where it's going to go. It's such a small seam at this point, it's not going to be a problem at all. So I have a little bit of overhang there. That's not an issue. I'm not worried about that. It'll get taken care of in that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and finish clipping up all around the sides of this bag. So now I have my bag clipped all the way around. Couple things I want to talk about. When you start with your, we clip here first, like I said, then we clip our sides. A good thing to do is to go ahead and start your clips around your straight parts first, and then you can kind of ease in these sides. The sides around the curves are always the trickiest part when clipping and when sewing. A couple other things I want to point out. If you're nervous about sewing on the bottom of this bag, which Jenny's bags are usually a perfect fit, mine is here, so it's not going to be a problem. But if you're nervous or if it's not fitting as good as you want, you can hand baste the bottom of this bag. Hand basting helps alleviate having to use all these clips. It helps alleviate any concerns over shifting and things like that. Keep that in mind. Some people do staple their bags, so what you could do if you want to do that is you would just put staples all along, keep it out of the seam allowance, which this one has a 1/2 inch, so you could do it at an 1/8 or even up to a 1/4 if you wanted to do that method. I'm not going to. I feel fairly comfortable with this. What I am going to do is I'm going to start on a straight spot here, and so I'm going to sew all the way around here, and that gives me plenty of time to stabilize this bottom to my bag before I hit my first curve. I'm also going to sew while I'm looking at my my bottom panel, so my actual bag will be against the bed of my machine. These are a couple things that I do to just kind of help it make it a little bit easier for me. But go slow, and you shouldn't have too many problems getting this sewn on at a 1/2 inch. After we're done sewing this, we're going to trim our seam allowance down to an 1/8 inch, and then we will be done with this portion of our exterior. Make sure you keep out. You can see how it kind of wants to tuck in there. We don't want to sew over this, so make sure you're constantly pulling and working through that part. Okay, I'm going to peek in there and I can see it looks amazing. I'm so excited, but we got to start working on the interior. So I'm going to set this aside and we'll get started on the interior. You're going to pull out your lining panel, the one with the cutout and the deck of the light. You're going to pull out one of your zipper pocket linings, and of course you'll have your zipper and your other zipper pocket piece there. Okay, so first thing we'll do is we'll start with this. What I did was I centered this piece here, my zipper pocket lining. I centered it on my lining panel. I also put it 1 inch down from the top. So this is 1 inch down from the top. Then I measured another inch down and drew a box. Now, I'm making these small, so it will depend if you're making the small or large, what size box you draw. So make sure you pay attention to that. It is going to be 1 inch in from each side. Your box will only be a half of an inch big. So once you have your measurements and you have them drawn, what we're going to do now is we're going to sew on this box. Now I'm going to tell you, I do not sew these little sides right here. Everybody's different. I think most people do sew a complete rectangle. Just for me, I feel like I get a better, crisper finish when I don't, but some people don't like that. So you can sew however your preference is on a zipper box. So I'm going to go ahead and take that over my machine, and we're going to do that right now. Make sure, whichever method you choose to do, you make sure to back stitch every time you start and stop sewing around this zipper box. So that was my first line, and then this is my second line. I'm going to go ahead and move my clips and get them out of the way now. So I went ahead and drew a line that's 1/4 of an inch down from the top, or halfway in the middle of this 1/2 inch box. I'm going to use my seam ripper, and I'm just going to start here in the middle and get a hole started, and then I will take my scissors. I will cut down this line, but what I'm going to do is I drew a little V here. I will not cut past this V in the middle. When I get to this V, I will go to each side. Whichever method you chose to sew your zipper box on, make sure you do not cut any of your stitches when you're cutting into your V. Let me show you again this on this side. I will use my seam ripper to get a box, a hole started. Then I will cut all the way down till I get to my V that I drew. Then I will veer to the side, each side, but I will not cut my stitches. Now when you get to that V, what you're going to do, like I said, is just snip to the edge without cutting your stitches. Do that on the other side. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this pocket through the hole, and then I'm going to take this over to my ironing board and do a really good press on it. What I want to do is make sure I get it pressed really nice so there's a really clear opening here. So I'm going to take a few minutes to do that, and I will be right back. Okay, so I've got that ironed. I put a couple clips there since it was still warm, just to kind of hold that in place a little bit. If you flip it over to the back, you can just see that your lining is right sides up. So what I'm going to do now is take my clips out, and I'm going to get my zipper. Your zipper's length will depend on which size you are sewing. So go ahead and follow the pattern for that. Whenever I put my zipper in, I always have it closing to the left, but that's a personal preference. Now what I do is, she has you cut the zipper a little bit longer, which is great, kind of helps things out. So what I do is I simply take my zipper over to the sewing machine like this, and I just do it, just sew it in without any clips, tape, anything. You can add double-sided tape here. You could put pins here, anything like that. You want anything that helps you to feel more comfortable, but I just do it and kind of guide it as I go with my stiletto, just to make sure I have it exactly where I want it to be. Okay, so what I will do on this part is I'm just going to sew around this edge 1/8 of an inch, and you can see where that little lining is trying to pull through. While I'm sewing, I'm just going to kind of keep adjusting that to make sure it stays out of the way. I want my zippered teeth to be directly in the middle of the box. So I will just keep working with that and making sure I have it there. It may seem like more work to do it this way, but I feel like it's more organic. Like I can move and adjust things as I go instead of like the tape stuck there and I'm having to fight with it. But this method may not work for everybody, so definitely do what works best and makes you feel the most comfortable. Once I have my zipper installed, you can see from the back where it is. We're going to put our other lining panel we have right sides down. And we're just going to put a couple clips in here on the sides. Oh, got it a little too high. On the sides and the top. We are not going to be sewing across the bottom because that is how we will be birthing the bag. So we are going to sew, I think she says, 1/2 of an inch seam allowance around the sides, top, and down the other side. The way I do this is I flip my lining panel up and I just pull back and sew that way so I can see what I'm doing, and it seems like it's the easiest way and the safest way to not get my lining caught in my stitches. Okay, last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim up my sides. I'm going to trim that down to about 1/8 of an inch. Okay, this completes week 3 of our sew along. So we have our exterior pretty much finished, and our lining is ready to go. We will come back on week 4 and we will finish our bag completely. So if you have completed this week's steps, please post a picture of your progress as a comment underneath this post. And I'm so excited to see how your bags are looking. Thank you so much for sewing with me today.